afternoon, everybody. My name is Gavin Dennis, and today we'll be discussing how to tackle payroll. And this is a webinar expressly for Express Truck Tax and Truck Logics clients. So thank you for joining us today. Hopefully you've either attended or replayed the previous webinars. If you haven't, you can find those online on our website and get caught up. Here we go. So first, I want to let you know who PayWow is, or what PayWow is. We are a cloud-based payroll solution that is geared, pardon the pun, toward the transportation industry. We've been at this quite a while. We're located here in Rock Hill, South Carolina. And we have over 30 years experience supporting payroll needs and taxes. We are based, like I said, right here in Rock Hill, South Carolina, US of A. And we are registered IRS e-filers. And something we're really proud of is our SOC 2 certification. That is a security internet certification we worked quite hard for. So today we'll be talking about how to tackle your payroll. But first, we're going to recap the previous webinars in case you missed a few. Then we'll talk about the different options on how to address your payroll, whether it be outsourcing to a firm like PayWow, using a CPA or accounting firm, maybe it's the one you're already using for other needs of your business, or keeping it in-house, doing it yourself or with your staff. We'll talk about some features to consider. We'll also what the best time to start with a new payroll provider or new system might be for you, and what that looks like in the beginning. So previously we discussed the difference between employees and contractors. It's not an election. You can't just choose to make somebody a 1099. It's determined by a series of questions that are developed by the IRS to help guide employers with making the right designation, whether it be a W-2 employee, which there are payroll taxes and other requirements there, or if they are indeed a contractor. And then once you've decided, or determined rather, what your workers are, then that tells you whether you have a payroll need, a contractor payment need, or a combination of both. Some companies have both contractors and W-2 employees, so it's important to know. The corporate structure may impact whether or not you have employees. There could be a single person, the business owner, might still be an employee of that business, although the owner may own 100% of it, depending on how the company is set up. So it's important to know that and work with your tax advisors to make sure that you're setting that up correctly. And we also discussed the differences between earnings, which creates a positive pay for the employee. Deductions come out of that pay, and that could be taxes, that could be benefit contributions, 401k contributions, things of that nature. And then reimbursements. Reimbursements would be repaying an employee for money that they have outlaid on the behalf of the company. Say they had to buy supplies for the company and the company is simply paying them back. That is not a taxable event. And it's important to indicate it correctly because that does not show up on the employee's W-2. And then different ways to pay workers. There's always cash. Although not usually recommended these days. You can use checks, direct deposit, and there are some other apps out there to transfer money, Bitcoin, things like that. And it's make sure that you have selected something that is reasonable and can be utilized by your workers. So now that you've determined that you have a payroll need, where do you go from here? Well, you have a couple options. One, you can outsource to a payroll service provider like PayWow, or perhaps a local provider. You can outsource it to a CPA or accountant. Oftentimes, business owners already have a CPA or accounting firm assisting them with other needs, and depending on the firm that is being used, they may also offer payroll services. Not all do. Another option is to keep it in-house, to do it yourself. This could be whether the owner or the manager taking care of the payroll, or if there's an employee that is tasked with that, that would also be an option. And we'll go over the benefits or pros and cons of each. First, we'll start out with outsourcing to a payroll service. Definitely my preference. There are a lot of pros here and very few cons. Payroll service, this is what they do day in and day out. It's reasonable to expect that they are experts at payroll. That also goes into payroll taxes, and the most reputable payroll providers will guarantee tax compliance. And that means that if there's an error made, they would cover the penalties and perhaps the interest, if it applies, to any of those errors that was made on behalf of the provider. Another pro would be professional pay stubs. It makes employees feel good and confident about the company they're working for to have a professional, clear pay stub, and pay stubs are a requirement by the government. You have direct deposit options usually. There's a lot of efficiency with outsourcing to payroll services, whether it be either an online portal to enter the payroll or a sheet that you submit. Lots of different options. Sometimes it can be automatic through an integrated time clock. And there are, depending on the payroll service provider, there are a lot more features than you would probably have from either a CPA or doing it on your own. Some examples of that would be employee self-onboarding, taking that burden off of the administrator and allowing the employees to not only onboard, but perhaps make their own changes to their tax elections, direct deposits, addresses. All those things add up to a big time savings. So that might be beneficial for you and your business. Of course, there are some cons with this. It's an additional cost, depending on the provider, of course. A lot of times the costs vary widely based on the amount of features that are being provided and the general size of the provider itself. And there are different service levels, whether it be full service, where they're compiling it and doing it all for you, somewhere in the middle, providing options for input and then doing the calculations and submitting the payroll, or very minimal and just simply taking payroll inputs at the end of a quarter or month and taking care of simply the filing and not really doing the calculations. There are a wide number of options there, and it depends on your need and which one best suits your business. Second option is to outsource to your accountant or CPA. Some pros and cons here as well. One of the biggest pros is CPAs and accountants are typically the most trusted advisor because they are handling all of the money and responsible for the tax, whether it be corporate taxes, depends on the industry, but with trucking, there are lots of different guidelines and tax requirements, and oftentimes CPA is the go-to for that. They're already familiar with your business, so that makes it easy and very, very comfortable. And then that gives you that one-stop shop convenience. You just, one number takes care of it all. On the other side of things, that's also typically the most expensive option, a lot of times by a good margin. Depending on the size firm that you've hired, if it's a one-person CPA, there may not be backup. So sickness or other requirements may leave you without a contact at all. And then their availability, depending on the time of year, may change. Somewhere around April, they may not be as easy to get a hold of if you may have a question or a need. And so that's something to consider. And then the last option really is to keep it in-house, to do it yourself, or have staff do it in-house. The biggest pro here is no additional cost. It's typically already an expense to have the staff do it or yourself. But there are a good many cons, and a lot of it is you don't really have any support, no help, no guarantees that we mentioned earlier with the service provider. And that puts all the responsibility on the owner, the manager, or the administrator, whoever is responsible for the payroll. Accuracy can be questionable. Payroll errors can be quite costly. The IRS has a penalty scale, and it can be up to 25% of the error, which can really cover some of the other expense for the other options to have those guarantees and have that support. It can be time consuming depending on how you calculate your payroll, how you're paying your workers. So all of these things are something to really consider, and whatever works best for your business. And this is not a completely extensive list, but it goes to show that keeping it in-house can really be one of the riskier options. So when choosing a payroll provider, there are some features, things to consider. And this depends on your business and how you want it to run. And so when you're interviewing, say, a payroll provider, is it full service? Do you call them on the phone and submit your payroll over the telephone? Or is it an online portal that you can enter the information in yourself and then have the calculations and the tax compliance and support done from there? Is the tax payment full service? Meaning, does the payroll provider file all the returns in a timely manner? Are they making the tax deposits as necessary in your behalf? Or do they simply give you the totals and allow you to do the filing and make the tax deposits? Again, there's a wide range of options, and it's important to know what makes sense for you and your business when you're selecting a payroll provider. Report availability, do you get paper mailed to you that you have to file in a cabinet, or is it digital, or is it both? The digital obviously makes it very easy to access from wherever you are, versus having paper in a single location makes it quite difficult, especially in the trucking industry. If the owner is also driving, the digital may be a lot more appealing. Onboarding, that can be done oftentimes by an administrator. depending on the service, it can also be done by the employee, like I had mentioned earlier. That is an option with PayWow. And also, what kind of support do you require? Do you want to just on the phone, email, chat, tickets, whatever works best for you? Everyone has different preferences and different needs, and it's important to make sure that the service that you choose suits your needs. So now that you've selected your payroll provider, when should you get started? Well, a lot of times you just think, well, we've already made that selection, so let's get started now. Well, it may not be the best time for you to do so. The best time would be at startup, from the inception of the business and you had your first payroll. That is a nice, clean way to have all your reporting accurate and all in one place. If that's not an option and you're an existing employer, starting on a new quarter, whether it be your first, second, third, or fourth quarter, starting that new quarter is a pretty clean slate because the taxes start on the quarter. So it makes it easy for record keeping that way. If you're an existing employer, start of a new year is definitely the best time to start with a new payroll provider. If you're not using one at all, get started as soon as you make that selection on which provider you're going to use. But if you have been using a provider or a CPA or some other type of service, the new year is a really good time to start because all of the payroll taxes reset on January 1st. And of course, if you're with a provider and just having a bad experience and things are not working well, that I think tells you go ahead and start with a new provider as soon as you can. So once you get started with the payroll service that you've selected, what does that look like? How do you get started? Well, of course, it varies depending on the company or service that you've selected. But in a general scale, they're going to ask for some basic business information, such as your federal ID, your state tax IDs, depending on the state. It might be withholdings, it will definitely be unemployment. If you don't have these, some providers will assist you with getting that account set up for you. Then once you get your business information put together, next step would be the employee's information. Of course, you have to have the employee's information before you can pay them and keep tracking of that. So information for those, and again, with PayWow, the employee can enter that information on their own and saves you a lot of time having to keep up with that. If you're just getting started, you may need to determine your pay schedule. Are you going to pay them every week, every 2 weeks, monthly? Make sure that it's very clear in your employee handbook, and then you bring new hires on board so that they know what to expect and they can plan. And how you're going to pay them once you determine that schedule. You can pay them via direct deposit, or you can make that an option. Are you just going to provide paper checks or some other form? That should also be in your handbook as well. If you're starting in the middle of the year, you're an existing employer, meaning you've already had payroll taxes at some point throughout the year. Even if you've suspended your business for a short period of time due to the pandemic, some other requirement, if you had anything during that calendar year, you're going to want to provide that information to your new provider so that at the end of the year, all of your quarterly and year-end tax filings and deposits are accurate and correct. Some providers may want proof of the previous tax filings and that the tax liabilities have been paid before they're willing to take on that responsibility for that tax guarantee that we mentioned earlier. So that may be simply having access to electronic records within the government agencies, or providing canceled checks, or however you've been paying those liabilities previously. That is a very quick and light look at how to tackle your payroll for your business. It was not meant to be completely exhaustive, but to help you ask the right questions when selecting a payroll provider so that you can get the most out of your payroll, ensure your tax compliance, and make sure that you're paying your employees timely and correctly. Here are some reasons why you may choose PayWow to be your preferred payroll provider. The tax compliance that we've talked about throughout this webinar and some of the others. The ability to offer direct deposit to your employees. If they're driving on the road, they may not be able to come into an office to pick up a paycheck, so they'd rather just get a text and see that they've been paid on Friday and know that the money's where it's supposed to be. We have a mobile app for mobile employees to be able to track their income. They can get pay stubs, they can see their W-2s end of the year, and they can make changes to their employee information, their onboarding, direct deposit, so on and so forth. They can even request time off, depending on your business. If you're using our time clock, they can clock in and clock out. Like I mentioned at the very beginning of this webinar, security, we are SOC 2 certified. We take security very, very seriously. And so you know that your information is secure and safe with PayWow. And we're right here in Rock Hill, South Carolina, here to support you with over 30 years of experience. So we hope that you give PayWow top consideration when selecting a payroll provider. But don't just take my word for it. This is a couple reviews from some of our clients, and I think you'll see that they're very happy, and PayWow is doing exactly what they hoped, maybe even more. That concludes the presentation. However, we have a couple minutes left for a question or two. So let me take a look and see what questions might have come up during the course of the webinar. Okay, so one question I got from, looks like Janelle. Okay, so from Andrea, it looks like, what type of reports do I need to provide if I switch mid-quarter? Oh, that's a good question. So if you're an existing employer and you're switching mid-quarter, you would need to provide all the previous quarterly filings. So if it was, say, now, we're just ending the third quarter, you would need to provide the first and second quarter returns, 941, and the unemployment returns for whatever state you might be in, as well as your state filings, depending on what state you're in. You may have some withholdings there. So you'd want to provide those with those reports. And then you would want to at least provide a payroll summary report for each payroll within the current quarter. If you don't have that, you could even go as far as copies of pay stubs for all the employees that were paid within that quarter. And it's important to mention that in the tax filings, or even that mid-quarter, the pay stubs, you would want to make sure that you include pay for terminated employees as well, because typically the payroll provider you're using at the end of the year will do the W-2s and or 1099s. And so you want to make sure that all of them are accounted for before the end of the year. So a lot of times the payroll provider would require these documents before you ran your first payroll. So having all that ready to go would be quite beneficial to you. And I think we can do one more. Yes. So it is, if a CPA is handling my payroll and a mistake is made, who is responsible, me or the CPA? Ultimately, it would be you. Now you can work with the CPA to make the correction and make everything right, but it is the burden is on the employer. So more than likely the CPA would work with you to get it resolved. If an amended return was required to get it fixed, I would expect that they would do what's necessary to correct the mistake. But know that if there was a mistake made, it is ultimately on the employer to get it corrected. And if the correction, and I'll go a step further and say if you were handling it in-house and then went to a payroll provider, even though the mistake was made when you're doing it in-house, bring it to your payroll provider. They have some experts on hand ready to assist you to at least get it corrected. There may be fees involved, but at least you know that it's done correctly, and all of your tax deposits and filings are accurate for the end of the year. So that would be my suggestion on that. Well, we are at the end of our timing. I want to thank everybody here for attending. I hope this was beneficial for you and your business and gave you some insight as to questions to ask and how to go about selecting a payroll provider for your business. Again, my name is Gavin Dennis with PayWow. Thank you. Hope to talk with you all soon.